Hello everyone, this is Ian Robinson with Creative 111 for Boris effects. And in this video, we're going to talk about the Sapphire effects and specifically the group of blur and sharpen effects within the Sapphire effects. So if we look at our project, you'll notice here in the effects and presets panel, I've already started searching via S underscore, and that'll show me all my Sapphire effects. And you can see that group that we'll be focusing on here is Sapphire, Blur, and Sharpen. So we'll look at some of the key effects that I like to use in many of my different projects. To start, I'll go to the project panel and double click on the 01 Rack Defocus Daylight Composition. Since my current time indicator is already at frame 0, I can go ahead and press the space bar and you'll notice it's going to go ahead and show me that rack defocus, and it did it blazingly fast. Yes, the frames were cached, but these effects are hardware accelerated, so they are ridiculously fast. Now, I'm going to go ahead and press the spacebar to stop playback because I want to show you where you can see the hardware acceleration is within these effects. In any After Effects project, if you go up under the File menu and go down to your project settings, this is where you can specify the hardware acceleration for your system. I'm on a Razer system that has a wonderful NVIDIA graphics card on it, so I've chosen the Mercury GPU Acceleration CUDA. If I were on a Mac, I'd probably want to choose OpenCL. I'm going to click cancel there. The other thing that I want you to see is when I select layer 1, I already have the effect visible. If you don't have that visible in your project, you can press the E key. E is in everyone, or E is in effect, and that will reveal any effects applied to that layer as long as that layer is selected. So I'll go ahead and select that effect and go to the Effect Controls panel and scroll down to the bottom of that panel. And you can see here, actually at the top of the panel, I have the S-Rack Defocus effect applied. And in the bottom of the effect, if I click on the Help button, you can see it's not going to launch a help menu. It launches help specific to this effect. And in the lower portion of that pop-up menu, this is where you can see CUDA acceleration available on NVIDIA, and it lists out your graphics card, etc. So I have my GPU enabled. I'll go ahead and click OK. There are other buttons that'll take you to more training and open up some of the different training materials, but you get the general idea. Works pretty quickly. So I'm going to move my current time indicator back towards the start of my project where everything is nice and blurred out. And then I'll scroll back up to the top of the effect, and I want you to notice that it is integrated with Mocha. So if you wanted to do some rotoscoping in Mocha and apply this effect only to one specific area, you could definitely do that. Usually the first thing we start with is defocus width. Now, I'll use the K and J keys to navigate between the visible keyframes in the timeline, and you can see we've just keyframed the defocus width. So it's going from 80 down to 1. So when it's up at 80, what can I do? Well, if I go to the lens setting here, the top option under shape, I could choose how the bokeh is going to look based on the kind of lens we want to recreate. So if I choose 3 sides here, you can see I've got these beautiful triangles. I could choose like 6 sides. When you choose something that's pointed like that, you can actually adjust the roundness. So if you want kind of a hybrid, you could do that. You could actually choose a negative value if you want it to look more like star bursts. I'll just undo those last couple changes here and go back to my circle settings. You can also adjust the lens noise, the frequency of that noise. You can adjust the noise along the x-axis, and you can adjust the noise seed. So as you can see, there are a lot of different settings within the lens settings themselves. Gaussian blur is just going to blur it out. I could adjust the gamma settings and the boost highlights settings. Let's look at boost highlights and highlight threshold. Those are probably 2 settings that I use most often in here. So I'm going to move my current time indicator down to where you can see more of the video, and you can see these boats have white tops and the edges of the shoreline have white caps where the waves were breaking, and those are the elements that are popping out. So if I adjust the boost highlights, I could make those brighter or I could make them a little darker. And I can also adjust the highlight threshold. So this looks at the luminance of all the pixels, and based on that luminance, it will adjust the brightness accordingly. So if the threshold is lower, it's going to brighten more pixels. If the threshold is higher, it's only going to brighten the lighter pixels. Color fringing is another fun one. Here I'll move up and I can adjust the color fringing settings, and you can see I can bloom out the colors if I want to. I can also adjust the chroma distortion. So if I wanted them to distort a little bit more with red, green, and blue, I can adjust that as well. I highly encourage you, when you apply this effect, go ahead and adjust the defocus width nice and high, and then you can change the shape to something that you like, and then go down through some of the different settings and scrub, just like you've seen me scrub, to set something that you actually enjoy. And then notice, even as I've been adjusting these settings, if I go ahead and press the space bar here, you can see blazingly fast, okay? It's working in the background, caching things. It's using the GPU for accelerated rendering. So just beautiful. I'll go to the 0-2 rack defocus, and this is a similar effect. The difference being this is a night shot. So if I go to the end here, you can see this is beautiful footage shot by Nick Haraz, time-lapse of the Northern Lights in Tromsø. In order to introduce this shot, we did a rack defocus, and if I select that video layer and open the effect controls, here you can see same sort of thing. Animated defocus width, adjust the shape. We could adjust the roundness. Notice it has a negative value, and that's how we're getting that little bit of puckering on here. There is keyframing with the Gaussian blur, but yeah, no, we didn't do any actual Gaussian blur on there, so I'll go ahead and just delete those keyframes. So like I said, apply it to the video, go ahead and make the settings nice and high with your defocus width, and then go through and scrub through the settings to create the effect that you would like for your individual video clip. Now I'm going to go back to my project panel and open up the 03 S Beauty effect. This is one of the effects that I use on, I'd say, 80% of my projects. If I've got footage of someone and I want to smooth their skin or just make it look a little bit more glamorous or give it a little bit more of a pop, this is the effect that I use. I'll select the video layer in the timeline here, and I'll go to my effect controls. And the first thing I want to show you is Mocha. If I open that up here, you can see I've actually got blur Mocha settings. And so if I go up under Edit Mocha, it's going to go ahead and launch Mocha, and you'll notice that we actually have a track that's been applied to the individual clip. So if I scrub in the timeline here, you can see as the footage is moving, the track on the initial drawing of the model here, it's tracking with her body. And then we had 2 additional tracks that were linked to the original layer track. So her neck and her face were also masked out using X-splines, but they were linked to the original track. So I'll go ahead and close this because I just wanted you to know that's how we isolated her with this effect. So what does it look like without the effect? Well, if I turn it off, you can see here, it's definitely added a little bit more pop and brightness to her skin. It looked fine before, but this has just kind of smoothed it out and add a little bit more interest into the scene with that actual pop. When you apply S Beauty, the first thing you want to do is try and isolate where you want these skins smoothed. In this instance, we used Mocha and rotoscoping. That is the most precise way to actually work with this. But another way you could do this is to actually use skin detection. If I open that up, you can see there is an eyedropper for skin color. So you can grab the eyedropper and sample her skin color, and then you'd want to go to the show dropdown and choose to view the matte. So you can see here in this instance, I was really having a hard time creating any sort of selection with this. And yes, I could go through some of the other settings to try and adjust how this goes. Notice this does a little bit better job with her skin here, but I still might want to do like a garbage mask around her or something like that. But again, since I had a little bit of time, it was easier to just go into Mocha and deal with that. One other tool you can use with this is the suppress background tool, which if I show the face widget, you can see it just creates an oval widget that I could adjust. So I could adjust the radius and the relative height so I could squash it or distort it accordingly. In this instance, like I said, Mocha worked the best. So with the Mocha mask selected and the background image turned off here, let me go ahead and turn off my skin detection show setting. I'll change it back to final. You can see how things have been smoothed out. So one thing you can do is adjust the pore size. So if you make the pores smaller, it's going to smooth things out. Pores a little bit larger, it's going to show you a little bit more detail. You can adjust how much it blurs, and you can adjust the softening of the shadows separate from everything else. So here, if I bring that in, you can see it's going to start softening in the shadow area first, and then it'll pop up in some of the other areas as well. You can adjust the threshold with that, which of course will determine how much of the shadows it's using. And then you can smooth things out. Let's say you shot someone and they had a little bit of shine in their footage. You could go ahead and reduce shine, which is another wonderful thing when you're trying to smooth the skin out and make adjustments. You can do color correction, so you can shift things on the hue if you wanted to. I don't necessarily want to do that here. So you can see there are some minor adjustments you could do. Here in this instance, we have the brightness. We could bring the brightness up or down. And so that's how we got that nice little bit of pop on her skin. With this effect, what you want to do is go ahead and apply the effect, and then first try and isolate the skin that you want to adjust. In this instance, we used Mocha. Then you can go through the pore size and the color correction settings and even add like a soft focus or a glow brightness. And if you go a little bit too far, you can actually mix the source back in to the footage. So if you're like, oh yeah, this looks good, but I want a little bit more texture, I could mix that in just by adjusting this. An amazing effect, something I use literally 80% of the time when I'm working with footage of people. Let me go back to the project and go to the D-band option. I gotta tell you, I wish I had this plugin years and years ago when I was first starting, because a lot of the projects I was working in were in 8-bit color space. And in 8-bit color space, it's really hard to get a really nice soft gradient like this. So let me show you. If you look in the project panel here, you notice at the bottom, I'm in 32-bit color space. That allows for more colors, which means I can have a softer gradient for the look. I'm going to go ahead and select this layer so you can see in the effects here, we have a gradient ramp that's been applied. And then we have the Sapphire effect SD band that's been applied. And SD band is what's kind of smoothed this out. But to see how it's smoothed out more clearly, I'm going to go ahead and hold down Alt on Windows. You can hold down Option on the Mac and click on this 32-bit button, and it'll go down to 8-bit color space. Okay? So now in 8-bit color space, if I toggle off the SD band effect, look at the banding that's happened in that gradient. Because the blue colors are so close to each other, it's actually just created that banding in there. But even in 8-bit color space, all we had to do was apply SD band, and now all of a sudden it's smoothed out exponentially. Let's open up that effect and see some of the different settings. So you can adjust the edge threshold. So as I increase that setting, it's going to blur more and more pixels. So I'll go ahead and bump that up closer to 1. And then grow edges will just kind of allow you to smooth that out a little more. Here, if I go ahead and bring that down, and then I say grow edges, you can see it's kind of a subtle adjustment. Here, let me go ahead and just bump that up. There we go. If I grow my edges here, you can see it's going to pop the edges a little bit more. So now I'm actually getting kind of a line through there, which I didn't necessarily want. So usually when I'm doing grow edges, what I'll do is adjust the edge threshold first to a setting that I like, and then I'll go ahead and mess with the grow edges option. So here I could look at the result. If I wanted to see the edges, I could do that. So here, let me go ahead and bring the edge threshold down. And now you can actually see the edges that are in here. So as I grow the edges, you can see exactly what it's doing, trying to blur out those lines. So if I go back and increase the edge threshold to a higher number, and then I bring the grow edges down here, you can see it's going to be a little bit better. Let me bring it up to like 1.1, which is where we were at before. And now I'm not seeing any edges. So I can go back to the result. So you can adjust the threshold and the diffuse radius if you need it to go a little bit further. You can apply a blur before it does the deband or after, hence pre-blur or post-blur. So yeah, you can see there are a lot of different settings. Honestly, when I apply this, most of the time, I'm just increasing the edge threshold and then adjusting the grow edges. And then I might adjust the diffuse radius to kind of smooth things out a little bit more, just because sometimes you can get a little bit of noise in there. Those are the main settings that I use with deband. So edge blur grain removal. This is kind of a neat technique. If I open up this composition here and select the layer in the timeline and go to my effect controls, you'll notice I have edge aware blur applied. I love this effect. What it does is it actually allows for edges to stay in your footage, but still add blur to your footage. And in this instance, there was a fair amount of noise in this video clip. So here, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this effect. And immediately you can see it's a little bit sharper in the scene, but this is a beautiful kind of foggy morning shot. So the fact that I want to add a little bit more softness to this to offset the sharpness of the noise is going to play right into working with this effect. So here, let me go back to the beginning and I'll press the space bar. And here you can see I've actually got noise in the trees. It's very, very subtle, but there is a little bit of noise. I know it's harder to see with the web compression, but you're just going to have to trust me. It's definitely there. Now, as I scrub through, you might be able to see it a little more clearly, but when I add S edge aware blur, it's going to smooth that out and it adds a little bit more of a dreamy look to the footage, which plays right into this beautiful foggy morning. So first thing we do is we can apply a blur amount. And of course, just like all the others, there's Mocha integrated, so if you only wanted this to be applied over a specific area, you could do that. But what I like to do is just crank up the blur amount so I can see exactly what's happening here. And you notice I can make it really dream sequency if I wanted to, but I'll keep it really small around 1.5. You can adjust the blur along the X or the Y, and then the edge threshold will show you or allow you to adjust the threshold for the edges of the elements. So if I increase the edge threshold here and I crank up the blur amount, you can see it's getting really blurry. But as I decrease the threshold, you can see it's keeping more and more of the edges of this effect. If I set it back down to 0, it's going to keep everything nice and sharp. So I'll just undo those last couple of scrubs here to get it back to the way that we had it before. Now, under blur type, you can keep sharp edges, which is what I would want to do in this specific instance because I'm trying to preserve that extra detail of these leaves and these trees in the distance. But you can actually choose to soften the edges, which will just give it a nice little soft look, or softer edges, which is really going to kind of blur it out a little bit. I personally like the sharp edges. And then you can add a filter over top of that, whether it's using box or triangles or Gaussian or smooth. What I suggest is click through and see which versions you actually prefer. S-edge aware blur is a great way to help bring noise down and add a little bit more dreaminess to your footage. And then if you still want to kind of address some of that noise, you can apply S-deband on top of that. And that's going to, again, try and smooth things out while still helping preserve the detail of the edges within this individual shot. So another really kind of cool technique and effect you can use on your footage. Let's check out the tilt and shift, defocus and edge aware blur. This is really kind of a cool effect. If I select my layer in the timeline here, you can see this is actually an S effect. If you browse through the presets, there is a preset for this tilt and shift look. Here, let me go to my effect controls here. I'll go ahead and scroll up and I'll choose load preset just to show you the preset in the preset browser. So since this is an S effect, like I said before, there are a ton of presets and they cross a whole bunch of different effects. So we could scroll through to browse through each one of these things. You can click on any one of the examples, and of course it'll just give you a little example here. I've got preview on source set up, and I know this is a tilt and shift effect, so I'm going to go ahead and search my presets, and I'll just type the word shift, and sure enough, here it is. It's the more advanced tilt and shift effect. You can see I've got different examples here, and again, I can just preview this right on the sample to see exactly what it looks like. And in the description, you can see it's got a bunch of different settings. And of course, I've already made adjustments to these settings. So instead of actually choosing load right now, I'm just going to click cancel and we'll go back through the individual settings of this effect. So you can see I've got Mocha up at the top where I could choose a Mocha matte if I wanted to matte this. And then as a part of this effect, there is first a toy look, which is what's giving me the blur around both sides. So here I can adjust the blur amount. Let me go ahead and toggle this off and on so you can actually see the difference. This is the original shot here, which is just someone that clearly can't sleep. But to add a little bit more dream to this, we've got this effect applied. And you can see, again, hardware accelerated. If I press the space bar here, it's just playing in real time and it's caching frames, which is kind of amazing considering it's got so many different effects here. In focus, it's allowing me to choose what's actually in focus. So I could set the center of this, which happens to be on this person's head. Here I could just move it just a little bit directly over their head if I wanted to. I could square it out instead of having it be so round. I could adjust the radius of the effect. Notice as I'm scrubbing that here, I could have it be wider, which means sharper further out, or I could bring the effect in closer. So it's blurrier, a little closer to the center of the subject. You can adjust the relative height and width of this. The edge softness and smooth curve. Well, this is actually the softness of the transition from the sharp pixels to the actual blurred out pixels. Defocus is kind of fun. You can adjust the focal depth or depth of field. So here, if I go ahead and scrub on this, I'm actually defocusing this as it moves through the scene, which is kind of a neat little effect. I don't want to do that, so I'll just undo that last little adjustment here. And then you can distort the perspective, so we can bring in the corners of each of these sections of the effect. So as I click on each corner here, you can see I could reposition the corners and adjust things accordingly. If you don't want to set a point, you can just press escape, and that'll get you out of setting the individual corner for that. And then finally, you can adjust the colors. So the saturation, the brightness, and the darkness offset. So as I toggle this effect off and on, you can see we've added a little bit more saturation, 1.5. We've adjusted the brightness there a little bit as well. And we've offset the dark settings. So again, just like all the other effects, go ahead and scrub through to see how things look. But this is a great way to apply a tilt and shift effect, and it was under the S effects as one of the presets. So I'll go back here in the project panel and I'll double click on the 07 free lens comp. And this is kind of a fun example. If I select this video layer and go to my effect controls here, you can see the first thing we adjusted were the levels, which is just a built-in effect. And the levels adjustment allowed me to just wash this out a little bit more and give it a little more of a faded film look. And then when I do S free lens, that's allowing me to make adjustments as though I had popped the lens off the front of my camera. So I can adjust how that works. I could shift it left or right, and you can see how that's actually going to change things. I'm scrubbing on the X parameter to set left or right. I could adjust a tilt on it, which would be like if I were tilting the lens in different directions, and notice that introduces more light leaks into the side, which is kind of cool. I could adjust the distance, which is how far the lens is from the sensor, and that's going to pull the distance of the subject back and forth in the scene. We can rotate highlights. Just by scrubbing here, I could adjust how the highlights are rotating through the scene. I can come down here and defocus. If we go to the defocus option, I could adjust the defocus width. I could set a focal point and offset it based on the focal point. If I do defocus, you can see exactly what's happening around the edges here. I'm getting this nice ring that's showing me exactly how wide and far this actually is going. You can adjust the highlight shape, whether it has different sides or whether it's just circular. And just like the other effects, we can boost the highlights and adjust the highlight threshold. We can adjust the distortion details. We could have it distort just a little bit in one direction. We could have it distort in the opposite direction. So again, open up the options, go through, scrub, see what you like. Enabling light leak will allow me to adjust the light leak settings. So again, I could adjust the intensity of the light leaks as they come through the scene. So here, I could add a lot more light leaks. So here, if I increase the light leaks and then press the space bar here, you can see it's going to just give me different light leaks through the edges of the scene. Now, I'm getting these beautiful kind of more pastel colors because I've adjusted the outer color, the mid color, and the center color to these more pastel, washed out, brighter looks. You can even add shake into the animation, so it actually will shake the scene as you're moving through. So you can actually get a little bit more movement and twisting in the scene. You can adjust how much it twitches, how often it twitches, the amplitude, the frequency. You get the general idea. Now I'm going to pause here for a quick second because I want to stress the importance of something. These shake details will function just like S-shake. So once you learn how to work with an effect, if you're in SFX, chances are you'll see modules like this that will work the exact same way. So once you learn it, you'll know it everywhere. If you really want to add a lot more interesting pop to the footage of your scene, go ahead and check out S-Freelens. You can add light leaks, distortion, all different kinds of things. So you can see this was the original footage, which is just kind of moving back and forth. But with Freelens, now we've got a little bit more float and distortion in the scene, as well as the edge blur and other interesting effects that we've done through our lens manipulations and distortion details, etc. I'll go ahead and press the spacebar, stop playback, and go back to the project panel. Let's look more at light leaks. I'm going to go ahead and double click on the 08 composition here. And notice I have my video layer and I have an adjustment layer. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the adjustment layer for now, and I'll select my main video layer and go to my effect controls. So here, I'll go up under Load Preset, and it's going to open the preset browser. So once we see the preset browser, you can see I've got a bunch of different presets in here, and sure enough, there are blurred presets. So if I go ahead and double click the blurred preset option here, you can see I've actually got the S texture chroma preset in here. And if I go ahead and press play, you get a general preview of this. I just want to see what it looks like on my clip itself. So what I'll do is just click load, and that'll load that onto my adjustment layer. Since I've already done this, I'll go ahead and just click cancel. But I wanted you to see there are a ton of presets that go with all of these blur effects. So once we see the preset browser, you can see I've got a bunch of different presets in here, and sure enough, there are blurred presets. So if I go ahead and double click the blurred preset option here, you can see I've actually got the S texture chroma preset in here. And if I go ahead and press play, you get a general preview of this. But you know what? I just want to see what it looks like on my clip itself. So what I'll do is just click load, and that'll load that onto my adjustment layer. Since I've already done this, I'll go ahead and just click cancel. But I wanted you to see there are a ton of presets that go with all of these blur effects. So I'll click cancel for now because in my adjustment layer, I had that S effect, which was a preset. And in here, I have the texture chroma spiral setting, and I could adjust the noise frequency. So here, I'm going to change this blend mode on that layer back to normal, and you can see all the kind of chroma goodness I've added into the scene. We could adjust the noise frequency, and you can see that's making the noise pattern larger or smaller. I liked setting it around 6. We can adjust the noise octaves, which is how many times it's actually going through the different colors as it goes through the pattern shape. And again, we can adjust that on the X, we can adjust things on the Y, we can set the center point. But really what I wanted to do was just kind of blend this in with the pre-existing light leaks that we had applied to the layer below. So to do that, I went to an old school After Effects method using a blend mode. So if you don't see blend modes, you can go ahead and right click next to the layer name and go to columns and make sure that you have modes enabled. And then here I went ahead and chose soft light because that's going to go ahead and blend with the lighter pixels from the layer below. So when I have that enabled, now you can see I've got this nice little bit of chroma that's been added just into the lighter pixels, which happen to coincide with the light leak elements. So if I press the space bar here, you can see, boom, playing in real time, hardware accelerated. Now I not only have light leaks, but I have a nice little chroma pop over top of that. So we started with a base effect, and then we went into the presets and added the preset to an adjustment layer to blend with the layer below. So by no means are you limited to just applying an effect to a video layer. You can take things to the next level by adding adjustment layers and adding blend modes. You get the idea. So I'm going to go back to the project panel and open the 09 light leak composition. And this one is a traditional kind of music video style light leak example. So if I select the video layer and open my effect controls, you can see we have the light leak effect, and the scale lights is up at 0.52. And if I go ahead and just press the space bar here, you can see I've got this really cool kind of light leak effect on the sides. If I turn that off, you can see what we had originally. Not nearly as exciting. Yes, her motions are kind of getting to you, but you know, really the light leaks is what kind of adds the energy to the individual scene. So in this instance, we popped up the flicker frequency and added a little amplitude to the flicker, and then added some randomness to the motion. And if you check out glow, you can adjust the glow width and glow brightness. So notice glow width is nice and high, and that's how we have these right up on the edges like that. I'm going to go ahead and stop playback and go to my project panel and open up the blur Mo curves comp. And this is a really cool way to make a custom transition. So I'm going to go ahead and just move my current time indicator to the beginning of the project, and I'll press the space bar here, and you can see I've got this cool footage, drone footage of our friend rolling on his one wheel, and we have this really cool kind of blur zoom in transition, and that's all been created by this one effect. So I'll select my video layer and open my effect controls. So you can see this is the S blur Mo curves effect. And you can see we've animated a number of things. The Z distance, the rotation, we've shifted things on the X and the Y. We've adjusted the shutter duration. So let's see all these different things that we're going ahead and adjusting. The most important thing that we set here is this center parameter. So if I click on that target button, you can see it's set up in this instance over here. I'm going to press escape because The center button really didn't come into play until we started actually spinning this. And we wanted the spin to basically be centered around our main focus, which is our one wheel person. So if I go ahead and click on this again, you can see the center is still up on the side here. Let me move the center down here and let's see what it looks like. Notice as I moved the center here, it's kind of adjusting how the rotation actually worked. So what we did is we went ahead and started the rotation by scrubbing the rotate parameter here like so. And as we adjusted the rotation, then we went ahead and scrubbed the center to make sure that it's actually over top of our one wheel person. So now as I scrub through, you can see it's zooming in right on our person. So Shift X and Shift Y, this will allow you to actually slide the footage. Notice I could create kind of a rolling camera effect as I adjust that if I wanted to, but of course I didn't. I just wanted to have a base adjustment as it came through that individual instance. We could adjust the exposure bias. Notice here as I bring this up, it's actually adjusting the exposure of the shot just a little bit. So it just added a little bit more pop. And then we could adjust the brightness of the actual zoom. So here I'm bringing up the scene. It's adding the brightness to the scene, and here's the exposure bias. So you can see it's in relation to the actual zoom itself and just creating that little bit of interest as we're doing that rotation. And again, we can adjust the center just by scrubbing like so if we want the center to actually be perfectly centered on our guy. But as you can see, as I'm doing that, I'm adding additional keyframes. Well, as I'm scrubbing the different parameters that are keyframed, I'm adding additional keyframes to the scene. So this isn't quite the original thing that we had at the start of the project, but I think you have a general idea as to how S Blur Mo Curves works. Basically, you apply it, you can adjust the rotation and shift settings, and then once you've adjusted that, you can go ahead and determine where the center is going to be on that individual focus. And then you can adjust the wrap settings, whether you want it to actually tile the effect or reflect the effect. And you won't really see that adjustment until you start going to this shift parameter. Notice when I shift, now I'm getting reflection. But if I chose tile, it's just going to tile the individual adjustment. And of course, I'm getting a hard edge on that individual adjustment because of how I've actually shifted this individual clip. But if I shifted it along the Y, you could see it's much more repetitive because I'm not seeing those hard edges for that individual setting. So as you can see, there are a ton of different things you can do with the blur and sharpen effects inside of the blur and sharpen Sapphire effects. I hope you've enjoyed this little whirlwind tour, and I look forward to seeing you again as we continue diving through some of the other different Sapphire effects. Once again, my name's been Ian Robinson. Thanks so much for joining me.